morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to All Access, a little show about what's happening with the arts in the Valley. My name's Graham Slayton. By day I run the Wheeler Opera House, and I'm going to put a quick and shameless plug in for our comedy festival, which is February 20, 21, 22, and that's all I'm going to say about that so that we can get right to the subject at hand this morning, which is my very good friend and one of my favorite interview targets, Lynn Goldsmith, who has come out with a really exciting and really heavy new book that is just absolutely laden with some of the greatest rock and roll stories I have ever read. Lynn, welcome.
Well, thank you. You know, it's really an honor for me to be here with you because I have to say that the Wheeler and the artists and the events that you bring to us in the community are so amazing. I can't think of any other place in the world that gets the quality of entertainment in the kinds of venues like the Wheeler.
Oh, you're very sweet.
In the world. Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
well,
it's true. I don't say things to be sweet. As you know, when you read my book, Rock and Roll Stories. And when you said heavy, you meant it because it weighs 6 pounds.
6 pounds.
Yeah.
You can get 2 of these and do your aerobic exercise.
That's
in the
right.
morning.
And you know, the book is $60, which means that it's $10 a pound. I just wanted to clarify that because that's cheaper than some of the meats at the market here.
Let's not even go into that.
Okay.
I don't want Michael Goldberg calling me about that. But let's, we got to fit all of this into 28 minutes, and God knows we could talk about this for 2 or 3 hours as far as I'm concerned, because this is some of my favorite stuff with some of my favorite characters in the whole world. But let's go through your story quickly. The last time I interviewed you was when I was fairly new to town. I didn't know you that well, and you really didn't want to be known as a rock photographer then. You were really into your art photography, which is also absolutely wonderful and another whole subject that we could talk about sometime. But now you've gone back and embraced this idea of being a rock photographer.
Well, I've embraced I don't think I am a rock photographer. I don't know what that means. Do I photograph rocks? You know, I think I'm an artist and I use photography as a tool. But I'm far more open to embracing the title rock and roll photographer at my age because it's so sexy. In fact, today, February 13th, is the celebration of the Beatles appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show in Miami Beach, Florida, which was my first published image, and that would be 50 years ago today. So I just want to say that if you want to call me rock and roll from now on until hopefully I live to be 100, I'm embracing it.
And that's a great story because, just to jump ahead of the story a little bit, your stepfather, who was in the hotel trade, basically wanted to impress you and get closer to you by sort of introducing you to the Beatles. He had tickets for a show, and I think for the Ed Sullivan Show, didn't he?
Yeah, it was before my photograph is before they walked on the stage. They were in the lobby of the Deauville Hotel.
And you have that great picture of all 4 of them, but it's of their lower legs and feet.
Yes. And I have to say that's because, you know, in those days you chose. You were either a Beatles fanatic or Rolling Stones. And I was and still am, I would say, a Rolling Stones girl. In fact, you know, all of this hubbub for February 9th when they appeared on Ed Sullivan in New York City, and everyone calling them the greatest rock and roll band of all time, it still upsets me because to me, it's the Stones, you know. I mean, I Want to Hold Your Hand compared to like Satisfaction or any of those tunes. Honey. Rock and roll Rolling Stones. They're the greatest in the world, yeah.
Well, one of the things I really love about this book is how much of yourself you put into it. I mean, you really give your whole life story in here, and it's unglossed, unvarnished. It's the truth, and it reads like the truth. And one of the things that you get very quickly in this is that the 2 major influences in your nuclear family were your mom and your sister Ellen. Yes. And your mom, both your parents were artistic, but your mom had a lot of expression and really drove you to in fact, you have a dedication quote at the front of the book about, you know, following your dream, just doing whatever it is you want to do.
That's true. I think I was incredibly fortunate, particularly for the period of time that I was born in, where I don't think most parents suggested to their daughters that there were possibilities outside of getting married and having children. So I was fortunate enough to have a foundation of being told to follow your bliss, follow your dreams. My parents divorced, as I talk about it, when I wrote the introduction to the book, because Rock and Roll Stories is really about the journey of my life, using rock and roll as the seducer for people to read the stories. The point is that I'm always asked, how did I get to meet these people? You know, how did I become a photographer? And really, I hope that anyone who reads it can see through my journey that that wasn't my plan. And we don't necessarily have a plan, that life brings certain things to us, okay?
Yeah.
You can have a path, but there are things that happen along it that take you in that direction.
Yeah.
And really, you know, my father, even though he wasn't a daily presence in my life, was incredibly influential, because I might not have even ever made photographs. I talk about how he was a serious amateur photographer, and really my early photographs were of my dolls, who I dressed and did their hair and gave identities to. And that's in fact what I do with the musicians in Rock and Roll Stories. So they, in essence, have become my dolls. And only when I got tired of them did I decide to become my own doll with my self-portrait series.
Yeah, that's a wonderful Diane Arbus quality to some of those doll pictures at the beginning. And
I'm sick.
They're a little unearthly, and that's great, because there's so much creativity already in them. And thank you for including some of them in the book as well. But you know, you went through that magic with your father that I went through when I was a teenager, and discovering what a darkroom is like.
Yes.
And you see the image actually come to life in the development tray. And that is I mean, I really identify with that, because that's a crystalline moment where suddenly the world is just revealed, that you can make images and manipulate images, and you have a key to the magic.
Well, that's the word, Graham. The word is magic. I think it was the darkroom experience that made it very clear to me magic existed in the world. And it's one of the reasons that I am so attracted to and continue to photograph, no matter what directions my career takes, because I have done other things, but I always make photographs. And part of that is because for me, it resounds with the magic that's in our world.
The other influence that you point out so beautifully, about that same time, you know, there was that whole repression of rock and roll that your parents' generation was imposing on the kids. And it was your nanny, Shirley, who sort of introduced you to the girl groups, and particularly Little Richard. And I remember that first moment of hearing Long Tall Sally as well, and just the whole world going, whoa!
Well, actually, I have a little scar right here, because when I heard the Long Tall Sally, I was playing with my dollhouse, which was made out of tin. That's how old I am.
Yeah,
we had and it was a big dollhouse. My dad had made it for me, and I started running circles around it, just like in the story of like Little Black Sambo, where he turns to butter. And I ran circles around it until I ran into it. And anytime that song came on, I would do things. I think I was the first headbanger. Because I would slam my head into the wall, and thus my mother took me to see a psychiatrist when I was about, I don't know, 8. Yeah.
And then when you're 13, and 13 is such a critical year in a person's life, because your hormones are going crazy, and you're discovering a world. But your world turned into Miami Beach, because you had to move there. You were 90 miles away from Cuba, where the missile crisis was going on. And then there was this guy from Minnesota named Bob Dylan, who was coming out of nowhere and redefining everything. How in the world could you have coped with so much change in such a short amount of time? And then you came out of it on the rock and roll side of life.
That's a good question. I think I'll do my next book, Rock and Roll Stories 2, around that one. You know, I think a lot of things happen to kids when they are teenagers, and I look at everything, every stress situation, whatever it is, as my opportunity to grow and to become more present. Hearing Bob Dylan really shifted my universe, because I always thought, having been seduced by the Fred Astaire and Ginger Roger movies that were on television at 6 o'clock. You know, they always played these old movies.
Yeah.
And I would sit so close to the TV that, you know, it was like I was about to dive into it, that they had one misunderstanding and then everything would get resolved. You know, they'd figure out it was a misunderstanding, and the world was right.
Right, you
know?
could solve the entire world's problems in 30 minutes.
Right, but I heard Bob Dylan, and it made it really threw my world into a whole new stratosphere, because his songs were about things happening that may or may not end up with a happy ending for your life, but that it's really about the journey. That's what I got from his music, whether he meant it or not. And I think that that's what allowed me, hopefully, to be able to see every experience that I had as one that was put in my path for me to learn something.
And then while you're doing that, your sister Ellen is in New York City, and she's hooked up with John Cale, who became one
The
of
Velvet Underground, yeah.
original members of Velvet Underground, and an incredible artist on his own. This story keeps morphing and morphing, and then so you've got that teasing your head, and then you go to the University of Michigan. Again, the Vietnam War is escalating, things are going on, and you start your own band called the Walking Wounded, and you run
Well,
into
I didn't start it. I was asked to join. They existed.
That's even better.
Yeah, I was asked to join because Grace Slick had become incredibly popular in the Jefferson Airplane. And the band decided that by having a girl lead singer, they would, they would get more gigs. And that's how I joined the band. I always wrote songs and I sang. And there's a photograph of me in the book when I used to sing in coffee houses when I was 14.
Your Joan Baez moment.
My Joan Baez moment, absolutely. I actually thought I was Joan Baez, except my guitar was bigger than her Martin. I had a big-ass guitar, yeah.
And while you're at University of Michigan, you meet a character named Jim Osterberg.
Yeah, the first day, actually, signing up for classes, there were the three of us standing in line. And what I mean by the three of us is the rest of the world who was registering for classes seemed to be wearing either madras skirts and shoes that we called Weegians or penny loafers with pennies in them.
Yeah.
And my sister addressed me. So, I have some pictures of that in the book because no one really looked like that at the time.
Right.
And Jim had long hair. And then there was this other character who had a big afro, who was white. And he looked at me and Iggy, and he said to Iggy, your name is Iggy. Your name is famous. And me, I'm Panther White, and we're the White Panther Party. So I'm honored to say that we were the first members of the White Panther Party. Yeah.
And of course, Jim Osterberg morphs into Iggy Pop, starts the Stooges, becomes part of the whole sound coming out of Detroit and Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, you were there at a really great time with MC5 and the Stooges. I mean, there was a whole sort of angry, agitated, but very high-energy rock movement that was coming out of Detroit.
Well,
it sort of was the white balance to the Motown sound that was coming out of Detroit.
Well, the times that you mentioned, whether it was the Cuban Missile Crisis, There were the Vietnam War, burning, women's lib, burning of the bras on the steps of the Diag, you know, that we can do anything. Music at that time had evolved into not just being something for dancing like American Bandstand, but it was emblematic, and I think Dylan started that with his lyrics. It was emblematic of a revolution. It was about changing mind consciousness and wanting things to be different than the way your parents might have wanted them to be, and thinking that music would and could change the world. I think that's what that was about. That was what rock and roll was meant to be, in my opinion, and in the opinion of people who were my friends, like Patti Smith. She's still really on that kick of believing that, you know, she can help people to rise up. You know, I think that there's been a glamorization of rock and roll. You know,
a sanitation of it.
Well, you know, there'll still always be artists who come out there and, you know, are true. You know, my chapters in Rock and Roll Stories, because yes, it is a coffee table photo book, but it is really, that's the guise to bring you in. Yeah. The chapters, whether it's talking about photography, like Photo Nightmares and what happened and how I handled those situations, or whether it's sharing the personal relationships that I had in in the chapter Friends, Good People, and Lovers. That's really all about my coming to a place in my life and willing to be able to expose myself now, because not because I want to tell tales on somebody or you know, do grievances, but because I want people hopefully to get something from, you know, my life experience that they can relate to that will be helpful for them.
And then a whole lot of stuff happened. I'm going to really combine some stuff quickly here. You come out of college and you get into the music business, and there's a wonderful quote in there that you say there was about 10 people in the business at that time, which really was true. I mean, there's no way in the world somebody could come out of college now and just walk into Elektra Records, pretty much saunter in and get a job and have the kind of access to talent.
Well, I didn't saunter in. I lied my way in. No, it's very important to know that I completely made up, that I lied about what I could do, but I knew that I would work my butt off to be able to do what it is I said I could do. That was the difference, but to get your way in, you had to, No, I was extremely lucky that I had that much gall to go after what I wanted. But
and timing was everything. Time is absolutely everything.
That's true for everyone in every facet of their life.
So you work at Elektra Records for a while. You work with Danny Fields and
no, actually, I replaced Danny Fields.
Replaced Danny Fields. I'm sorry. And then you leave there, you work for National Lampoon.
Who, by the way, part of that came from, and why I went to Elektra, there were a couple of reasons. Danny Fields had come to Ann Arbor, okay, because he'd heard about the groups there, and he came and heard us, The Walking Wounded, the SRC Case, MC5, and Iggy, and he signed MC5 and Iggy.
That's
you
true.
know?
That's true.
And that was why I went there, because, you know,
that's nice.
I knew Danny didn't, you know, Danny made up a lot of stuff, so I figured if he worked at a place where he made up a lot of things, I'll just go in and make stuff up, and then I better deliver like Danny did.
But while you're at Elektra, you start doing album photography.
Well, I did a number of things. Actually, I convinced the way that I got the job. I studied filmmaking at the University of Michigan, and I believed that we could promote the groups by making short films on them.
Oh, you were
and
only
giving
20
them
years too early
to
on that
the
one.
Army bases and stuff. No, and I made films on Delaney and Bonnie, The Doors.
Yeah.
So, in fact, you know, I feel I was the first music, they weren't videos, they were 16mm films, and I was the first one to make them. And that's what led me to Joshua Television, which then by that time, ABC network television had figured out that there was a place for rock and roll, and that was how I got to be the director of ABC's TV's In Concert, the first rock and roll show on television.
Yeah, I remember that very well. That's where we tuned to, because it was the only way. It's impossible for now in 2014 to understand how little access there was to the music you loved other than an LP and a radio station. You didn't get to see the acts. They didn't really tour that much. You didn't have pictures that you could put on your wall. You couldn't download anything. So when you had something like an album cover, you held on to it tight, and if you got an opportunity to see the Rolling Stones or whoever on Ed Sullivan or whatever, you cleared everything in your calendar and sat squat down in front of the television. That's what you did. So when Don Kirshner came on with In Concert, I can remember one of the first acts on there was the Rolling Stones.
Kirshner's In Concert was a different show than ABC.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. His thing was called Midnight Special, and it came after the success of ABC's In Concert.
But it was nice that there was a rush of finally some content of rock and roll.
Oh, it's just big business realizing that there's money in rock and roll. That's all. It's that simple, you know.
Well,
they finally realized. They looked out and they said, "Let's see, Grand Funk. They just sold out Shea Stadium faster than the Beatles. 100,000 people. You know, faster than a football game. I think we should do something with rock and roll."
So, since you segued nicely over to the Grand Funk, you transitioned quickly over to them at a time in their career when they really needed an outside view and a boost.
Yeah, well, I have always been about breaking limiting thought patterns. And that had to do with making the films to promote, like when I was at Elektra Records and I made the bio disc. It was like, what can I come up with that other people have done parts of, but I can like put it together and make something else out of it. So that's what I've always done. It's no different today than it was when I was 18, you know, yeah, so when I got tired of directing for ABC, I saw there was a need for Grand Funk to have an identity. The photography is just an extension for me of being able to look to how I can help another person or group, whatever it may be more of what they are, and how I can bring the audience closer and make that audience have the person that they think the art represents. So that's always been what I've done, and you know that's why in the book Rock and Roll Stories, in the chapter Style, I have stories whether it's showing you how when Bryan Adams walked into the shoot, it was his first album cover, and he's wearing, the only clothes he brought was like this little green suit that an elf would wear, you know? Yeah. And I totally had to change him to get him to sound like his music visually.
Yeah, you did that with several artists.
Yeah. But now they hire people to do that. Yeah. Now we have the stylist.
Well, you know, one of the things I love about the book is, and you have several instances of it in here, is you show up for a job and you have 20 minutes, no assistant, no lighting, no nothing. You've never met the band before. They're a little bit hostile because they have to stop what they're doing to do this stupid picture, and you have to make art in 20 minutes out of nothing.
Well, you've seen me do it. Hello. You know, that's why I'm me. The idea is, you know, get the trust, become their immediate best friend, and get it done.
Yeah. Well, they tell us, speaking of get it done, that we have 5 minutes left, which is ridiculous. And I have such a long list of people.
Well, you can always have me back anytime you want.
We'll do that. But let's just touch on a couple of them, because Bob Dylan was such a big part of your life growing up, and such a transitional artist for you. There's the great story in there of first meeting Bob, and then the whole thing with the hat.
Oh, yeah, the hat was a number of years later.
But it's still, it's all Bob. And it's all true to Bob.
Everything's all Bob. Life is all Bob. No, the photo session with Bob Dylan, my first one, is a pivotal moment in my life because, as I said, the only individuals who had formed, other than my parents, a belief in what the world was all about was Fred Astaire and Bob Dylan. All the other artists who people might be in awe of. I never looked at it like that. I never looked at Jim Morrison that way. I never looked at the Beatles that way. You know, it was like, I'm as good as they are, you know, and we're here to get this done. That's how I've always been. But with Bob, I really had to come to terms with, am I a photographer going in to get what it is I need to get, or am I a fan? Because you don't make the same kinds of images by being in awe. You know, you have to be able to be in it, but not of it.
Right.
And so the story is in the book, because I know your time is short. And later on, the story with the hat is just that it was about 5 years later, 1983, and Bob always wore this hat. And he asked me what I wanted for my birthday, which was the day before yesterday. However, I take presents late if you have any or your audience has any. And so on my birthday, Bob handed me the hat. And I think I was so scared by it, because I'd been joking, because I knew he would never give me anything. He would say, what do you want for your birthday? And I said, I want your hat. You know, so he gave me his hat, and I looked at the hat, and I said, this is not the hat. And the look on his face, you know, he was like so hurt. So it was too dangerous for me, you know. I'm, like I said, be in it, but not of it.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of stories I would love to cover in here. Meeting Chuck Berry, your relationship with Patti Smith, your long relationship with Frank Zappa, which was both positive and difficult at times.
With Frank?
A little bit, when he didn't want to go and shoot the way you want.
Oh, that, yeah.
Your whole history with the police. I want to go into the long story.
They're going to want to know what was difficult with Frank. Now, it's just that Frank wouldn't do everything I wanted him to do when I wanted him to do it, but he wasn't a difficult person. He was quite an amazing human being. And
I want to go into the story about this motorcycle jacket, which you thread through here really nicely. Gene Simmons on the New York City Transit bus.
What do you want me to talk about?
We can do this for hours. It's all right here in the book.
It's all the stories are all in the book.
So can we get this locally?
Well, actually, I'm doing a book signing at James Pierce.
Oh, nice.
I don't know. I think it's February 15th. I should have known that before I came on the show. But they will have to contact the James Pierce. It's in the next few days.
But they can go to your website as well and find out.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and obviously it's at Amazon, and you know it's the book is available, and it's there if you want it, you know. But I have a rule: you can't buy it unless you read it.
And this is one that you really want to sit down and read. There's no make believe in this.
I hope so.
So. Thank you, Lynn. We have to come back and do this again. We absolutely have to do this again. And thank you all for watching All Access. We're going to be back here next week. We'll get Lynn back. Thanks for joining us. Good night, Stewie.